Hey friends, it's Hailey here. Welcome to another Shorts for Survival episode. I recently participated in a powerful webinar training called A Shock to the System, Strategies for Victim Service Providers to Effectively Respond to Disasters. It was hosted by the NRCDV Training Institute in partnership with the Cloudburst Group. Information for both will be in the comments or in the video description below. And it inspired this very episode because one theme kept coming up. And honestly, we hear this phrase a lot these days. Trauma-informed. But what does that actually mean in real life? For survivors, for communities, for people just trying to get through the day? That's what we're going to explore today. And no, this isn't some polished lecture or overproduced podcast. I'm just sitting here with my dogs on my porch and my monstera plants, ready to talk about what it really means to live and show up trauma-informed. So here's the question that kept circling in my mind after that training. What does it really mean to be trauma-informed? And how often do we pause long enough to even consider if we are living in that way? Because if you are a survivor or someone trying to make it through a world that often re-traumatizes people in the name of helping them, this isn't just a trend. This is a tool for survival. This is a tool for safety, a tool for personal power. So let's break it down. What does it really mean to be trauma-informed? Being trauma-informed is more than being kind. It's more than throwing around phrases like hold space or sending love. It's a framework, a lens, a way of existing in a world where we recognize how trauma impacts people and we change what we do because of it. So SAMHSA defines trauma-informed care using 6 core principles. First, safety, meaning people feel emotionally and physically protected. For example, a trauma-informed shelter might provide a variety of sleeping options to honor privacy, personal boundaries, and identity, along with pet-friendly policies and clear expectations or behavior so people aren't caught off guard or re-traumatized. Pillar 2, trustworthiness and transparency, meaning policies, actions, and decisions are made with openness. So this could look like a caseworker explaining a process step by step so a survivor doesn't feel manipulated or left in the dark. Pillar 3, peer support, meaning healing happens in relationships with people who have lived through similar experiences. Think of community-led support circles or mutual aid groups where no one is above anyone else. Pillar 4, collaboration, meaning survivors are active participants in their care or recovery plan. So in a healthcare setting, this might look like a provider co-creating a safety or treatment plan with their patient instead of dictating it to them. Pillar 5, empowerment, voice, and choice, meaning survivors are giving meaningful options and autonomy. This could mean letting someone decide when and how they share their story, or how many times they need to reshare their story, or even offering multiple ways to access help beyond just phone calls or paperwork. And Pillar 6, cultural, historical, and gender relevance. This part of the approach honors a person's identity and lived history. A trauma-informed emergency response team, for example, might consider how survivors with disabilities face barriers in accessing shelter spaces and create protocols to ensure physical accessibility, communication, accommodations, and dignity in care. So here's a gut check. If something we're calling trauma-informed doesn't actively prioritize these principles, it might be time to pause and reassess what we're actually practicing. And you don't have to work in healthcare or mental health or any particular sector to practice it. You just have to care and be willing to show up. So now let's talk about why this matters in disaster and crisis settings, because that's where it often gets ignored the most, but is likely needed the most. So after a disaster hits, a flood, a tornado, a war, even a personal crisis like domestic violence, we see systems scramble to help. But survivors, especially women, often get re-traumatized in shelters where there's no privacy, no control, no safety from abusers, no cultural competency, Or imagine a survivor having to call multiple hotlines after a disaster, desperately trying to find help, but each one tells her a different thing. Some don't know if she qualifies. Some aren't updated on available shelters. Others ask her to call back later. But she's already in crisis, and now she's left navigating a maze of conflicting, disconnected systems. Or when she applies for FEMA assistance but realizes it requires a permanent address, internet access, and a printer. Resources she hasn't had in months. She's been living in her car with her kids after narrowly escaping violence, and now her abuser is stalking her. On top of that, the forms ask for personal details that could put them at further risk. But none of this complexity is accounted for in the system. It simply assumes stability, safety, and access, things that survivors often don't have. Or a disaster shelter intake where she has to explain her story again and again because systems aren't coordinated. Her information isn't shared safely, and every new provider or helper asks her to start from the beginning. She's forced to relive it over and over and over, and likely in front of her kids, who are then also having to live it over and over and over. This is what happens when systems aren't trauma-informed. Research shows gender-based violence increases after disasters. And not even just natural or climate-fueled disasters. We saw this happen, and we called it the shadow pandemic during COVID-19. And it hasn't gone away. When we ignore trauma, we worsen outcomes, period. So how do we actually live this way? How do we bring trauma-informed values into our daily lives? Here are some examples. You ask someone what they need instead of assuming. You believe someone the first time they tell you that they're not okay. You slow down your response when you feel dysregulated. You give people choices, options, autonomy. Being trauma-informed means saying, take your time. You get to decide. You're not overreacting. You make sense. It also means doing that for yourself too. Regulating your own nervous system before reacting. Understanding your own triggers so you can stop blaming yourself, start giving yourself grace. These small steps. This is how we start to shift culture. Take something like transitional shelter assistance, known as TSA. It's a program that's supposed to provide temporary hotel stays post-disaster. But if you are experiencing homelessness or escaping an abusive home pre-disaster, there's a chance you may not qualify at all. This leaves survivors with no safe place to go, especially if they were living with their abuser. Living trauma-informed might simply mean asking someone in your community, do you have a plan if things go wrong? And offering to be their emergency contact. It could also mean advocating for non-congregate shelter options, like hotel rooms instead of gymnasium cots, for people who have been through interpersonal trauma. Okay, but what if you haven't lived through a natural disaster or had to navigate shelters or FEMA paperwork? Being trauma-informed still matters, and it still applies to you. Even if the crises you're living through isn't a flood, a fire, but burnout, caregiving, chronic stress, or just trying to keep it together in a world that often asks too much and offers too little. Let's make it real. It might look like giving your kids a heads up before switching routines. It might mean texting a friend. Do you have the capacity to talk about something heavy? It might mean giving grace to the parent who seems short-tempered at the grocery store because maybe they're just fucking overwhelmed. Not trying to be unkind. Trauma-informed living isn't just about perfection. It's about awareness, flexibility, and openness and adjustment. You don't have to have all of the answers, guys. You don't need a clinical or any kind of professional background. You just need to be willing to pause, ask, and listen. Because that tiny pause, that tiny moment of care, that is what shifts culture too. So you might be thinking, But I'm just one person. I don't run a system. And that's okay. You don't have to, because systems are made up of people. And those people make decisions based on what's normalized around them, right? Every time you make space for someone's story, ask how someone wants to be supported, advocate for a friend in crisis, or even just believe someone, you are reinforcing a new standard. You are practicing care that heals. You are doing what systems should do all the time, even when they don't. And that matters more than you know. One of the biggest insights that struck me from this recent national webinar on survivor response strategies during disasters was this. Survivors and victim service providers are often not included in disaster planning. That means domestic violence shelters aren't always looped into local emergency meetings, or advocates aren't seen as essential partners, even though they are often the first to hear someone's story. Being trauma-informed in this context means understanding that chaos is often exploited by harm doers. And without that thoughtful planning, systems can accidentally replicate harm, and often do. You might not run to a shelter or a city council, but you can ask your community leaders. Are survivors being included in your emergency response plans? So here is a Shorts for Survival challenge you could try this week. Pick one, just one, of the trauma-informed principles. Again, safety, trustworthiness and transparency, peer support, collaboration, empowerment, and choice, and cultural, historical, and gender relevance. Choose just one. Ask yourself, where in my life do I struggle with this? Where do I see it missing in the systems I interact with? What's one tiny shift I can make today to bring this principle into how I choose to show up in this world? What does safety feel like in my body? Who helps me feel that way? How can I offer that to someone else without overextending myself? I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. How are you already living trauma-informed in your everyday life? What's one way you plan to start implementing it after this episode? What trauma-informed habits or tools have helped you feel safer, more regulated, or more supported lately? And what's something you've let go of because it no longer aligns with the way you want to show up for yourself or others, or how you want to feel in this world? What's a situation that made you feel seen, safe, or respected? And what made that moment possible? Is there a small change you've made, whether it be at work, at home, in your community, that felt like a trauma-informed win? What feels hard or confusing about putting this into practice? And what support would help you be able to put it into practice easier, more naturally? Because we don't need perfection to start healing. We need people who are willing to stop pretending trauma doesn't exist or systems aren't suppressing. If you learned something today, please send this episode to someone you care about. Share your thoughts, your aha moment, or your story if you feel safe to do so. And remember, tiny shifts can create massive impacts. You've got this, my friends, because here's the truth. Disasters don't necessarily create abuse, but they can definitely intensify it. They for sure increase stress, disrupt support networks, and make it harder for survivors to find safety or stability. And in those conditions, the risk of harm often grows, and the cracks in our systems get even wider. And while it's easy to feel powerless in the face of broken systems, the real shift begins in how we respond, how we show up, and how we demand better, not just for ourselves, but for each other. Please, if you got anything out of this episode, please like, share, comment, subscribe, all of the things. And until next time, please take care of yourself. Give yourself an extra big hug. You've got this, my friends.